The bell above the door of Rosie's roadside diner chimed as Samuel Crawford entered, his weathered hands gripping a worn leather jacket. At 72 years old, he moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose body remembered battles his mouth would never speak of. "Usual spot, Sam?" Maria Santos called from behind the counter, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Yes, ma'am," Sam replied with a gentle smile, sliding into the corner booth he'd occupied every Tuesday evening for the past 5 years since retiring to Pinewood, Montana. The peaceful atmosphere shattered when the door burst open. 6 young men in leather vests emblazoned with iron skulls MC swaggered in, their boots thundering against the checkered floor. Derek Reaper Sullivan led the pack, his neck covered in tattoos, his eyes scanning the diner like a predator assessing prey. His gaze landed on Sam, alone in the corner booth. Well, Derek sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Looks like someone's in the wrong neighborhood, old man. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." Samuel Crawford had lived in Pinewood for 5 years, but few people knew anything real about him. He was the quiet old man who ordered black coffee and apple pie every Tuesday. He tipped well, said please and thank you, and never caused trouble. To the residents of this small Montana town, he was just another retiree seeking peace in the mountains. What they didn't know was that Samuel Crawford had spent 35 years in the United States Army, with 22 of those years serving in the most secretive and elite military unit in existence, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, known simply as the unit to those who served in it. Sam had operated in places that didn't officially exist, completing missions that would never be declassified. He had led teams through hostile territories in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, and a dozen other countries whose names he could never speak aloud. He had received commendations that remained sealed in classified files, medals he could never wear in public, and scars that told stories he was forbidden to share. His DD-214 discharge papers, locked in a safe deposit box at Pinewood Bank, listed his final rank as Command Sergeant Major and his military occupational specialty in deliberately vague terms. Only someone with the highest security clearance would understand what those codes really meant. The tattoo on his right shoulder, usually hidden beneath his shirt, displayed the distinctive Delta Force insignia, a sword thrust through a scroll, wings spreading from either side, with the motto De Oppresso Liber emblazoned below. Beneath that, the dates of his service, 1978 to 2013. 3.5 decades of serving in shadows. Sam had retired to Pinewood specifically because it was quiet, isolated, and far from anything that might trigger the memories he spent every day trying to keep at bay. The nightmares still came sometimes, visions of missions gone wrong, of teammates who didn't make it home, of decisions made in fractions of seconds that determined who lived and who died. He had chosen this diner, this booth, this routine, because predictability was an anchor. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m., the same meal, the same quiet corner, the same peaceful hour before he returned to his small cabin in the woods. It was the opposite of the chaos and violence that had defined most of his life. Maria Santos, the waitress who had served him for 5 years, knew he was a veteran. She'd noticed the way he always sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. She'd seen how his eyes tracked movement with an alertness that seemed out of place for a man his age. But she respected his privacy and never pushed for details. George Patterson, the diner's owner, suspected Sam was more than just a regular Army vet. Something about the way Sam carried himself, the way he moved with economy and precision, suggested a deeper history. But George, himself a Navy veteran, understood that some stories were meant to stay untold. What none of them knew was that Sam still maintained his security clearance. He still received occasional calls from Fort Liberty, formerly Fort Bragg, where young operators sometimes needed advice from someone who had been there before smartphones and drones, when missions required nothing but skill, intelligence, and the ability to survive on instinct alone. His phone, a secured device that looked ordinary but contained encryption software, sat in his jacket pocket. In his contacts list were names that would make any military historian's jaw drop: generals, CIA directors, operators who had become legends in the special operations community. But Sam didn't want that life anymore. He'd given everything he had to his country, had sacrificed relationships, health, and peace of mind in service of missions most Americans would never know happened. He'd earned his quiet retirement, his Tuesday evening coffee and pie, his solitude in the Montana mountains. As Derek Reaper Sullivan and his Iron Skulls crew swaggered toward his booth, Sam felt the old instincts flickering to life. He recognized the walk, the posturing, the false bravado of young men who thought intimidation made them powerful. He'd seen it 1,000 times before, in 100 different countries, from enemies far more dangerous than small-town gang members playing dress-up in leather vests. Sam took a slow sip of his coffee, his weathered hands steady, his expression calm. He hoped this situation wouldn't escalate. He genuinely hoped these young men would leave him alone to enjoy his pie in peace. But if they didn't, well, he'd handled far worse threats than this. The training never left you. The skills never faded. And sometimes, the past had a way of reminding the present that appearances could be deceiving. Derek Reaper Sullivan had been terrorizing Pinewood for 3 years, ever since he'd founded the Iron Skulls Motorcycle Club with 5 other men who shared his taste for intimidation and easy money. At 28 years old, he'd convinced himself he was untouchable, a force of nature that controlled this small Montana town through fear and violence. The Iron Skulls weren't a major organized crime syndicate. They were small-time, running protection rackets on local businesses, dealing drugs to high school kids, and picking fights with anyone who looked at them wrong. But in a town of barely 3,000 people with only 3 sheriff's deputies, they'd carved out enough space to feel like kings. Derek walked up to Sam's booth, his heavy boots deliberately loud on the diner floor. His crew fanned out behind him: Kyle Peterson, a stocky enforcer with a shaved head; Travis Morgan, who handled the club's drug distribution; Justin Clark, whose specialty was intimidation; Blake Henderson, the youngest at 22, and Ryan Foster, who recorded their achievements on social media. "You deaf, old man?" Derek leaned against Sam's table, his leather vest falling open to reveal a cheap pistol tucked into his waistband. "I asked what you're doing in our diner." Sam looked up slowly from his coffee, his dark eyes meeting Derek's with an unsettling calm. "Just having my dinner, son. No trouble intended." "Son?" Derek laughed, and his crew joined in on cue. "You hear that? This fossil called me son." He turned back to Sam, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "This is Iron Skull's territory. We don't like outsiders, especially not old has-beens who don't know their place." Maria Santos approached nervously, her order pad trembling in her hands. "Derek, please. Sam's a regular customer. He's not bothering anyone." "Did I ask you, Maria?" Derek snapped, not even looking at her. "Go back to the kitchen before you get hurt." George Patterson emerged from the back, wiping his hands on his apron. "Come on, Derek. Let's not do this tonight. These folks are just trying to eat dinner." Derek spun around, his face flushing with anger. "George, you owe us $500 for this month's protection. Unless you want your windows smashed again, I suggest you shut your mouth and let me handle my business." George's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The last time he'd stood up to the Iron Skulls, they'd vandalized his diner and sent him to the hospital with a broken nose. He couldn't afford another confrontation. Derek turned his attention back to Sam, emboldened by George's silence. "See, old man? This is how things work in Pinewood. We run this town. The sheriff's scared of us. The business owners pay us. And random outsiders who don't show respect learn painful lessons." "I'm not an outsider," Sam said quietly, still seated, still calm. "I've lived here 5 years." "5 years?" Derek mocked. "And you still don't understand how things work? Let me educate you." He grabbed Sam's coffee cup and deliberately poured it onto the floor. "Lesson 1, when the Iron Skulls tell you to leave, you leave." Kyle stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Want me to help him understand, Reaper?" "Not yet," Derek said, clearly enjoying himself. "I want to see if Grandpa here has any fight in him, or if he's just going to shuffle out of here like the scared old man he is." Ryan held up his phone, recording the confrontation. This is going to get so many views. Iron Skulls teach respect a disrespectful elder. The comments are going to be epic. Sam remained seated, his hands folded on the table. His breathing was steady, his posture relaxed. To Derek, it looked like submission, like fear paralyzing an old man who knew he was outmatched. "I'll give you 10 seconds, Derek announced, pulling his pistol and laying it on the table next to Sam's plate. 10 seconds to get up, apologize for wasting our time, and walk out that door. If you're not gone by then, things get ugly." He started counting. 10. 9. 8. The other diners had gone completely silent. An elderly couple in the corner booth looked terrified. A truck driver at the counter was debating whether to intervene or flee. 7. 6. 5. Maria Santos had tears in her eyes, knowing what came next when Derek reached 0. 4. 3. 2. Sam picked up his fork and took a deliberate bite of his apple pie. Derek's face contorted with rage. "Wrong choice, old man. Kyle, Travis, grab him. Let's take this outside and teach him what happens to people who disrespect the Iron Skulls." The two gang members moved toward Sam's booth, confident this would be easy. After all, he was just a frail old man. They had no idea what they were about to unleash. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The atmosphere in Rosie's roadside diner had transformed from peaceful to predatory in minutes. The 6 Iron Skulls members circled Sam's booth like wolves surrounding prey, each one feeding off the other's aggression, their confidence building with every passing second. "You know what I love about this town?" Derek said, gesturing broadly to his crew. "Nobody stops us. Nobody even tries anymore. We've broken that spirit out of them." Travis Morgan grinned, showing teeth yellowed from methamphetamine use. "Remember that construction worker last month? Thought he was tough until Kyle broke 3 of his ribs. Or that college kid who tried to be a hero," Justin Clark added, laughing. "Spent 2 weeks in the hospital. His parents moved him out of state." Blake Henderson, the youngest, was bouncing on his toes with nervous energy. "My turn this time, Reaper. You said next time I could be the one to teach the lesson." Derek considered this, looking at Sam with calculating eyes. "Maybe, Blake. But let's make this educational for everyone. Ryan, make sure you're getting all of this. I want the whole town to see what happens when someone doesn't show proper respect." Ryan adjusted his phone, finding the best angle. "Got it, boss. This is going to go viral. Old man learns brutal lesson about respect. The algorithm's going to love this." The other patrons in the diner were frozen with fear. The elderly couple, Harold and Dorothy Mitchell, had witnessed the Iron Skulls' brutality before. Harold started to stand, thinking he should do something, but Dorothy grabbed his arm and shook her head. They'd learned the hard way that heroes in Pinewood ended up hospitalized. Frank Delgado, a regular who drove long-haul trucks through Montana, had his hand on his cell phone, debating whether to call 911. But everyone knew Sheriff Coleman was 20 miles away on another call, and his deputies were scared of the Iron Skulls anyway. By the time help arrived, it would be over. "Here's what's going to happen," Derek announced, playing to his audience. "We're going to escort our friend here outside. Then we're going to help him understand the social hierarchy of this town. It's going to hurt, but pain is an excellent teacher." Kyle cracked his neck, his massive hands flexing. "I've been waiting for this all day. Nothing better than putting someone in their place." "Make sure you hurt him enough that he needs a doctor," Travis added, "but not so much that he dies. We don't need that kind of heat. Just enough that he spends a week pissing blood and thinking about his mistakes." Justin pulled out a roll of quarters and wrapped his fist around it. "Street Fighting 101. The quarters protect your knuckles while you break his face." Maria Santos had retreated to the corner, her hands covering her mouth. She wanted to help Sam, but she'd seen what the Iron Skulls did to people who interfered. Her cousin had tried to stop them from harassing a teenager 6 months ago and ended up with a shattered jaw that required surgery to repair. George Patterson stood behind the counter, his face twisted with frustration and guilt. His diner had become a hunting ground for these predators, and he was powerless to stop it. The Iron Skulls had systematically broken down every instance of resistance in Pinewood over the past 3 years. They'd beaten down the high school teacher who tried to report their drug dealing. They'd torched the car of a city councilman who proposed increased police funding. They'd hospitalized the owner of the hardware store who refused to pay protection money. Derek leaned down close to Sam's face, his breath reeking of alcohol and cigarettes. "Last chance, old man. You can walk out of here under your own power with just your dignity hurt, or you can get carried out on a stretcher. Your choice. But either way, you're leaving, and you're never coming back to our diner." Sam slowly set down his fork, having finished his bite of pie. He wiped his mouth with his napkin, taking his time, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "Young man," Sam said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that made Derek unconsciously take a half step back, "I've given you multiple opportunities to walk away from this situation. I've been patient. I've been respectful. But you've made your choice." Derek's face flushed with anger at the implied threat. "Grab him. Now." Kyle and Travis moved forward, reaching for Sam's arms. The old man didn't resist, didn't fight back. He simply stood up slowly from his booth, his considerable height becoming apparent. At 6'3", even at 72 years old, Sam Crawford was an imposing figure. "Outside," Derek commanded, gesturing toward the door with his pistol. "Everyone gets to watch what happens to people who don't know their place." The 6 Iron Skulls members formed a circle around Sam, herding him toward the diner's exit. Ryan walked backward, keeping his phone camera trained on the scene, narrating for his social media followers. "This is what real power looks like," Derek announced to the terrified diners. "This is what happens when you forget who runs Pinewood." As they pushed through the door into the parking lot, none of the Iron Skulls noticed the slight smile that crossed Sam's face. None of them saw the way his shoulders relaxed, as if a weight had been lifted. And none of them understood that by taking this outside, away from innocent bystanders, they'd just made a critical tactical error. The parking lot of Rosie's roadside diner was dimly lit by a single flickering streetlight. The sun had set behind the Montana mountains, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Derek and his crew positioned themselves in a semicircle around Sam, blocking any escape route. Inside the diner, faces pressed against the windows. Maria Santos had her phone out, filming despite her shaking hands. George Patterson stood at the door, ready to call 911 the moment violence started, though he knew from experience the response would be too slow. "You picked the wrong town to retire to, old man," Derek said, circling Sam slowly. "Pinewood belongs to the Iron Skulls. We decide who gets to live here peacefully and who doesn't." Sam stood completely still, his arms relaxed at his sides, his weathered face showing no fear. His eyes, however, were active, tracking each gang member's position with the kind of situational awareness that came from decades of training most people couldn't imagine. He was calculating distances, assessing threats, identifying the alpha and the followers, noting who was armed and who relied on fists. It was automatic, instinctive, muscle memory from thousands of hours of tactical training. "Nothing to say now?" Kyle taunted, stepping closer. "All that tough talk inside, and now you're quiet as a mouse." Sam's silence wasn't submission. It was assessment. He was giving them one final chance to make the right choice, to recognize something in his bearing that should have warned them they were making a catastrophic mistake. But young men fueled by bravado and years of unchallenged intimidation rarely recognize warnings until it's too late. "I think he's scared," Travis laughed, pulling out a switchblade and flicking it open. The blade caught the streetlight, glinting menacingly. "Look at him shaking." Sam wasn't shaking. He was loose, relaxed, breathing steadily through his nose. His heart rate, if measured, would have shown the remarkable calm of someone who had faced death so many times it no longer triggered panic. He'd stood in Afghan villages surrounded by Taliban fighters. He'd been in firefights in Mogadishu. He'd completed hostage rescues in hostile territories where one mistake meant death for him and everyone he was trying to save. 6 small-town gang members with inflated egos and minimal combat training didn't even register as a serious threat. They were annoyances, problems to be solved with minimum necessary force. "Last words, Grandpa?" Derek asked, pulling brass knuckles from his pocket and sliding them onto his right hand. "Any final wisdom you want to share before we rearrange your face?" Sam took a slow breath, his eyes moving from face to face, memorizing each one. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. "You boys should walk away. Right now. While you still can." The Iron Skulls burst into laughter. "While we still can," Justin repeated. "Old man, you're surrounded by 6 of us. You can barely stand up straight. What exactly do you think you're going to do?" "Yeah," Blake added, emboldened by the group. "My grandmother could take you down, and she's 85 with a walker." Sam's expression didn't change. He simply began to remove his jacket, the worn leather sliding off his shoulders with practiced ease. Beneath it, he wore a simple gray t-shirt that revealed arms still corded with muscle despite his age. But it was what those arms revealed that should have stopped everything. On his right shoulder, clearly visible in the streetlight, was a tattoo that anyone with military knowledge would immediately recognize. The distinctive Delta Force insignia, a winged sword thrust through a scroll, with De Oppresso Liber inscribed below it. Beneath the insignia were dates, 1978 to 2013. 35 years of service in the most elite Special Operations Unit in the United States military. Derek saw the tattoo but didn't understand its significance. "Nice ink, old man. You get that at a biker rally? Trying to look tough with your fake military bullshit?" Kyle leaned in closer, squinting at the design. Something about it seemed familiar, like he'd seen it in a movie or video game, but he couldn't place it. Sam folded his jacket carefully and set it on the hood of a nearby car. When he turned back to face them, his demeanor had shifted subtly. The gentle old man who ordered coffee and pie every Tuesday was gone. In his place stood Command Sergeant Major Samuel Crawford, a man who had spent more than 2 decades hunting the world's most dangerous people in the world's most dangerous places. "I'm going to say this one more time," Sam said, his voice taking on the command presence that had once led teams of elite operators through hostile territory. "Walk away. Get in your vehicles. Leave this parking lot. And never threaten innocent people in this town again." Derek's response was to laugh and gesture to his crew. "You heard him, boys. The old man thinks he's scary. Let's show him what fear really looks like." "Reaper, wait," Kyle said, his voice uncertain. He was staring at the tattoo, recognition finally dawning. "That symbol. I think that's—" "I don't care what it is," Derek interrupted. "He's one old man. We're 6. Math is simple. Grab him." Travis and Justin moved forward first, reaching for Sam's arms. What happened next would become the subject of legend in Pinewood, a story told and retold with increasing amazement at how completely wrong the Iron Skulls had been about who they were dealing with. Travis Morgan reached for Sam's right arm while Justin Clark grabbed for his left, confident this would be easy. 6 against 1, and the one was a senior citizen. Simple math. Sam's response was so fast it seemed to happen in a single fluid motion. He sidestepped Travis's reach while simultaneously catching Justin's extended arm, applying pressure to a nerve cluster that sent the young man to his knees with a gasp of pain. Before Travis could adjust, Sam had pivoted and delivered a precise strike to a pressure point on Travis's neck. Not hard enough to cause permanent damage, but sufficient to momentarily disrupt his nervous system. Travis stumbled backward, his legs momentarily refusing to obey his brain. The entire exchange took less than 3 seconds. "What the hell?" Blake stammered, watching 2 of his crew suddenly incapacitated by moves they hadn't even seen clearly. Kyle was backing away, his eyes fixed on Sam's tattoo. "Reaper, we need to go. Now." That tattoo, I know what that is. That's Delta Force. That's the unit. Shut up, Kyle, Derek snapped, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. It's probably fake. Old men don't fight like that. Old men who spent 35 years in special operations do, Sam said quietly, his breathing still calm and steady despite the brief physical exchange. I'm asking you again. Leave. While you still can. Ryan had stopped filming, his phone hanging limply in his hand. He'd grown up watching action movies and playing military video games. He knew enough about Delta Force to recognize that the symbol on Sam's shoulder wasn't something people faked. It was too specific, too detailed. Reaper, Ryan said, his voice shaking, I think we should listen to Kyle. Delta Force guys they're not normal soldiers. They're the guys who go after terrorists. They're the ones who. I said shut up. Derek's voice was rising, panic creeping in beneath the bravado. He'd built his entire identity around being the toughest guy in Pinewood, the one everyone feared. The idea that he'd just threatened someone genuinely dangerous was threatening to shatter his entire self-image. Inside the diner, George Patterson had his phone pressed to his ear, talking urgently to someone. Maria Santos watched through the window, her hand covering her mouth. Justin had recovered enough to stand, cradling his arm. Boss, something's wrong with my arm. I can't feel my fingers. It's a nerve strike, Sam explained calmly. Temporary paralysis. Feeling will return in about 5 minutes. Consider yourself lucky I didn't use the lethal version. The word lethal hung in the air like a grenade. You're bluffing, Derek said, but he'd unconsciously taken a step backward. You're just some old man who got lucky with a couple of moves. Kyle pulled out his phone with shaking hands and did a quick search. His face went pale as he read. Reaper, listen to me. Delta Force operators go through the hardest selection process in the military. 2 years of constant training. They learn hand-to-hand combat from multiple martial arts. They're trained to kill people quietly with their bare hands. This guy has dates on his tattoo going back to 1978. He's been doing this since before we were born. Show me, Derek demanded, grabbing Kyle's phone. His eyes scanned the search results, reading about Delta Force missions, about the kind of men who made it through selection, about the operations they conducted in complete secrecy. Blake was already backing toward his motorcycle. I'm out. I didn't sign up to fight some Special Forces Terminator. You move and you're out of the club. Derek shouted, but his threat carried no weight now. Travis had recovered enough to speak. Derek, we sell drugs to high school kids and rough up business owners. This guy hunted terrorists for a living. We're way out of our league. Sam stood perfectly still, watching the realization spread through the group like a virus. He'd seen this before, the moment when overconfident adversaries suddenly understood they'd miscalculated badly. I'm 72 years old, Sam said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet parking lot. I'm not as fast as I used to be. My knees hurt when it rains. But I spent 35 years learning how to neutralize threats, often with my bare hands, against people far more dangerous than you. He took a single step forward, and 3 of the Iron Skull's members took 2 steps back. I had hoped to enjoy my retirement in peace, Sam continued. I chose this town because it's quiet. Because I thought I could leave the violence behind. But you've been terrorizing these good people, making them afraid in their own community. Derek's hand moved toward the pistol in his waistband, but Sam's voice stopped him cold. Don't. The single word carried such absolute authority that Derek's hand froze. You pull that weapon, and this situation changes from a teaching moment to something much worse. And trust me, son, you don't want to see what much worse looks like. Sheriff David Coleman's patrol car turned into the parking lot, lights flashing. George Patterson had called him, and for once, the sheriff had responded quickly. Kyle leaned close to Derek and whispered urgently, we can still walk away from this. But if we stay, if we fight, we're going to lose. And it's going to be bad. Derek looked at Sam, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the scars on the old man's arms, the way he carried himself with absolute confidence, the eyes that had seen things Derek couldn't imagine. For the first time in 3 years, Derek Reaper Sullivan felt genuine fear. Sheriff David Coleman stepped out of his patrol car, his hand resting on his service weapon. At 55, he'd been sheriff of Pinewood for 12 years and had learned to pick his battles with the Iron Skulls carefully. But the urgency in George Patterson's voice had conveyed something different about tonight's situation. "What's going on here?" Coleman demanded, his eyes taking in the scene, 6 gang members surrounding one older man, 2 of them clearly injured. "Sheriff." Derek tried to regain control of the narrative. "This old man attacked Travis and Justin without provocation. We want to press charges for assault." Coleman looked at Sam, recognizing him as the quiet man who had moved to town 5 years ago. "That true, Sam?" "I defended myself against a threat, Sheriff," Sam replied calmly. "These young men forced me out of the diner and surrounded me in this parking lot with the stated intention of causing me physical harm." "He's lying," Derek protested. "We were just—" "I have video," Maria Santos called from the diner doorway, holding up her phone. "I recorded everything." Derek and his crew threatened Mr. Crawford inside the diner, forced him outside, and surrounded him. He only acted in self-defense. Coleman's expression hardened. "Derek, how many times have I warned you about this kind of behavior? We didn't do anything wrong." Derek's voice was desperate now. "He attacked us." "With what?" Sam asked quietly, spreading his arms. "I'm not armed. I'm 72 years old. Your friend there had a knife, another has brass knuckles, and you're carrying a pistol. Who exactly was threatening whom?" Kyle stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Sheriff Coleman, we need to leave. Right now. This guy is Delta Force. Look at his tattoo. He's not some random old man." Coleman's eyes widened as he looked at Sam's exposed shoulder and saw the distinctive insignia. His entire demeanor changed instantly. "Delta? Are you serious?" Sam gave a slight nod. "Command Sergeant Major Samuel Crawford, retired. 35 years of service." The sheriff's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, surprise, respect, and then anger as he turned back to the Iron Skulls. "You idiots threatened a Delta Force operator? Are you trying to get yourselves killed?" "We didn't know," Blake protested. "You didn't bother to know." Coleman shot back. "You saw an old man and assumed he was weak. You've been terrorizing this town for 3 years, and tonight you finally picked on someone who could have ended all of you without breaking a sweat." Derek's face flushed red. "He's just one old man." "No," Coleman interrupted sharply. "He's a decorated special operations veteran who has forgotten more about combat than you'll ever learn. Delta Force operators are trained to fight multiple opponents simultaneously. They're trained to kill with their bare hands. And you surrounded him in a parking lot like a bunch of thugs." Ryan had been silent, but now he pulled up something on his phone. "Boss, you need to see this." I searched his name. Command Sergeant Major Samuel Crawford. He received the Silver Star twice, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, and the Distinguished Service Cross. He was part of operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia. He trailed off, reading the lengthy list of commendations and deployments. "This man," Coleman said, pointing at Sam, "has served his country with distinction for over 3 decades. He came to Pinewood to retire in peace. And you tried to assault him because you thought he was an easy target. Travis was holding his neck, still trying to recover from the nerve strike. He could have killed us." "Yes," Sam said simply. "I could have. But I didn't. Because unlike you, I don't enjoy hurting people. I spent my career protecting Americans from threats. I'm not about to become a threat myself just because a group of small-time criminals decided to act tough." Derek's leadership was crumbling. His crew was looking at him with barely concealed disgust and fear, realizing he'd led them into a situation that could have ended with them in body bags. "Here's what's going to happen," Sheriff Coleman announced, pulling out his handcuffs. Derek Sullivan, you're under arrest for assault, terroristic threatening, and possession of a concealed weapon during the commission of a crime. The rest of you, I want statements from each of you about what happened here tonight. You can't arrest me. Derek protested. We're the victims here. The victim, Coleman corrected, is Mr. Crawford, who was eating dinner peacefully until you decided to threaten him. Maria's video will show exactly what happened, and I'm guessing the diner's security cameras caught everything too. George Patterson nodded from the doorway. Every angle, Sheriff. Everything they said and did. Sam walked over to where he'd left his jacket and put it back on, covering the tattoo that had changed everything. As he turned back, he saw the fear in the Iron Skull's members' eyes, the realization that they'd built their reputation on terrorizing people who couldn't fight back, and the moment they'd encountered someone who could, their entire facade had collapsed. Sheriff, Sam said quietly, I don't want to press charges. I just want to finish my dinner in peace. Coleman stared at him. Sam, these men threatened you, forced you outside, and attempted to assault you. And they failed, Sam replied. They're young and stupid, but that doesn't mean they need to have their lives ruined. Consider this a teaching moment. He turned to face the Iron Skulls directly. But understand this, if I ever hear about you threatening anyone in this town again, if I hear about protection rackets or intimidation or violence against innocent people, I won't be so forgiving next time. Delta Force operators have a saying, de oppresso liber. It means to free the oppressed. That's what I've done my entire life, and retirement doesn't change that. The message was clear. They'd gotten a pass tonight, but there wouldn't be a second one. Derek, handcuffed and humiliated, could only watch as his reputation as Pinewood's toughest guy evaporated in front of everyone who mattered. Sheriff David Coleman stepped out of his patrol car, his hand resting on his service weapon. At 55, he'd been sheriff of Pinewood for 12 years and had learned to pick his battles with the Iron Skulls carefully. But the urgency in George Patterson's voice had conveyed something different about tonight's situation. What's going on here? Coleman demanded, his eyes taking in the scene, 6 gang members surrounding one older man, 2 of them clearly injured. Sheriff. Derek tried to regain control of the narrative. This old man attacked Travis and Justin without provocation. We want to press charges for assault. Coleman looked at Sam, recognizing him as the quiet man who had moved to town 5 years ago. That true, Sam? I defended myself against a threat, Sheriff, Sam replied calmly. These young men forced me out of the diner and surrounded me in this parking lot with the stated intention of causing me physical harm. He's lying. Derek protested. We were just. I have video, Maria Santos called from the diner doorway, holding up her phone. I recorded everything. Derek and his crew threatened Mr. Crawford inside the diner, forced him outside, and surrounded him. He only acted in self-defense. Coleman's expression hardened. Derek, how many times have I warned you about this kind of behavior? We didn't do anything wrong. Derek's voice was desperate now. He attacked us. With what? Sam asked quietly, spreading his arms. I'm not armed. I'm 72 years old. Your friend there had a knife, another has brass knuckles, and you're carrying a pistol. Who exactly was threatening whom? Kyle stepped forward, his voice urgent. Sheriff Coleman, we need to leave. Right now. This guy is Delta Force. Look at his tattoo. He's not some random old man. Coleman's eyes widened as he looked at Sam's exposed shoulder and saw the distinctive insignia. His entire demeanor changed instantly. Delta? Are you serious? Sam gave a slight nod. Command Sergeant Major Samuel Crawford, retired. 35 years of service. The sheriff's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, surprise, respect, and then anger as he turned back to the Iron Skulls. You idiots threatened a Delta Force operator? Are you trying to get yourselves killed? We didn't know. Blake protested. You didn't bother to know. Coleman shot back. You saw an old man and assumed he was weak. You've been terrorizing this town for 3 years, and tonight you finally picked on someone who could have ended all of you without breaking a sweat. Derek's face flushed red. He's just one old man. No, Coleman interrupted sharply. He's a decorated special operations veteran who has forgotten more about combat than you'll ever learn. Delta Force operators are trained to fight multiple opponents simultaneously. They're trained to kill with their bare hands. And you surrounded him in a parking lot like a bunch of thugs. Ryan had been silent, but now he pulled up something on his phone. Boss, you need to see this. I searched his name. Command Sergeant Major Samuel Crawford. He received the Silver Star twice, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, and the Distinguished Service Cross. He was part of operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia. He trailed off, reading the lengthy list of commendations and deployments. This man, Coleman said, pointing at Sam, has served his country with distinction for over 3 decades. He came to Pinewood to retire in peace. And you tried to assault him because you thought he was an easy target. Travis was holding his neck, still trying to recover from the nerve strike. He could have killed us. Yes, Sam said simply. I could have. But I didn't. Because unlike you, I don't enjoy hurting people. I spent my career protecting Americans from threats. I'm not about to become a threat myself just because a group of small-time criminals decided to act tough. Derek's leadership was crumbling. His crew was looking at him with barely concealed disgust and fear, realizing he'd led them into a situation that could have ended with them in body bags. Here's what's going to happen, Sheriff Coleman announced, pulling out his handcuffs. Derek Sullivan, you're under arrest for assault, terroristic threatening, and possession of a concealed weapon during the commission of a crime. The rest of you, I want statements from each of you about what happened here tonight. You can't arrest me. Derek protested. We're the victims here. The victim, Coleman corrected, is Mr. Crawford, who was eating dinner peacefully until you decided to threaten him. Maria's video will show exactly what happened, and I'm guessing the diner's security cameras caught everything too. George Patterson nodded from the doorway. Every angle, Sheriff. Everything they said and did. Sam walked over to where he'd left his jacket and put it back on, covering the tattoo that had changed everything. As he turned back, he saw the fear in the Iron Skull's members' eyes, the realization that they'd built their reputation on terrorizing people who couldn't fight back, and the moment they'd encountered someone who could, their entire facade had collapsed. Sheriff, Sam said quietly, I don't want to press charges. I just want to finish my dinner in peace. Coleman stared at him. Sam, these men threatened you, forced you outside, and attempted to assault you. And they failed, Sam replied. They're young and stupid, but that doesn't mean they need to have their lives ruined. Consider this a teaching moment. He turned to face the Iron Skulls directly. But understand this, if I ever hear about you threatening anyone in this town again, if I hear about protection rackets or intimidation or violence against innocent people, I won't be so forgiving next time. Delta Force operators have a saying, de oppresso liber. It means to free the oppressed. That's what I've done my entire life, and retirement doesn't change that. The message was clear. They'd gotten a pass tonight, but there wouldn't be a second one. Derek, handcuffed and humiliated, could only watch as his reputation as Pinewood's toughest guy evaporated in front of everyone who mattered. 3 years of criminal activity, Coleman said, shaking his head. And it took one 72-year-old veteran less than 5 minutes to dismantle the whole thing. I didn't dismantle anything, Sam corrected. They dismantled themselves the moment they assumed a person's age and appearance determined their capability. That's always been the fatal flaw of bullies, they mistake fear for weakness. Coleman's radio crackled. It was Deputy Angela Brooks. Sheriff, you need to get down to the station. We've got 6 more people waiting to file complaints against the Iron Skulls, and the FBI just arrived from Billings. Coleman stood, leaving money for his coffee. Sam, the FBI is going to want to talk to you. Your testimony about what happened last night is crucial. I'll cooperate fully, Sam assured him. One more thing, Coleman said. The town council called an emergency meeting for tonight. They want to formally thank you and discuss how to prevent something like this from happening again. Sam sighed. Sheriff, I don't want medals or recognition. I just want to drink my coffee in peace. I know. But sometimes the right thing to do and the comfortable thing to do aren't the same. Coleman headed for the door, then paused. Sam, can I ask you something? In all your years with Delta Force, all those classified missions, did you ever think you'd end up using those skills to fight a small-town motorcycle gang in rural Montana? Sam smiled slightly. Sheriff, I've learned that evil operates at every level. Sometimes it's terrorist organizations with international networks. Sometimes it's 6 thugs in leather vests terrorizing a small town. The principle is the same: good people deserve protection, and bullies need to be stopped. After Coleman left, Sam tried to return to his breakfast, but George Patterson approached with a serious expression. Sam, I need to tell you something. 3 years ago, when Derek first started his protection racket, I tried to fight back. I refused to pay. They beat me so badly I was hospitalized for a week. After that, I paid every month because I was too scared of what they'd do to my family. His voice cracked with emotion. I've hated myself for 3 years, felt like a coward for giving in. But last night, watching you stand up to them, watching you expose them for the frauds they are, it gave me my courage back. I'm testifying against them, Sam. And I'm going to encourage every other business owner to do the same. As George walked away, Sam reflected on the strange turn his retirement had taken. He'd spent 35 years fighting enemies of the United States in foreign lands, believing that when he retired, the fighting would be over. But evil didn't just exist overseas. It existed wherever people chose cruelty over compassion, violence over peace, exploitation over fairness. The tattoo on his shoulder read De oppresso liber, to free the oppressed. He'd lived that motto in Afghanistan and Iraq and Somalia. Apparently, he'd continue living it in Pinewood, Montana. 3 months later, the federal courthouse in Billings, Montana was packed for the sentencing hearing of Derek Sullivan and the Iron Skulls. The case had drawn regional media attention, becoming a symbol of small-town resilience against organized crime. Sam sat in the back row, uncomfortable in the dress uniform he'd been asked to wear by the prosecution. His chest displayed rows of ribbons and medals earned over 35 years of classified service, each one representing missions he could never fully discuss. Federal Judge Patricia Hendricks reviewed the evidence one final time before addressing the defendants. Derek Sullivan sat at the defense table, no longer the cocky gang leader who had terrorized Pinewood. 3 months in federal detention had stripped away his bravado, leaving behind a scared 28-year-old facing serious prison time. Mr. Sullivan, Judge Hendricks began, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, this court has heard extensive testimony about your criminal enterprise. For 3 years, you and your associates operated a protection racket, distributed methamphetamine, and committed numerous acts of violence against innocent citizens. She gestured to the prosecution's evidence table, piled high with documents, photographs, and recorded testimony. 23 documented assaults. 15 businesses extorted for a total of over $250,000. Drug distribution that resulted in 3 overdoses, 1 fatal. And a systematic campaign of intimidation that held an entire community hostage to fear. Derek's court-appointed attorney sat silently, having long ago realized there was no viable defense against the mountain of evidence. But what strikes me most about this case, Judge Hendricks continued, is how completely your criminal enterprise collapsed the moment you encountered someone who refused to be intimidated. Command Sergeant Major Samuel Crawford, would you please stand? Sam stood reluctantly, uncomfortable with the attention. The court recognizes your 35 years of distinguished service to our nation, the judge said. Your actions on the night of the incident demonstrated remarkable restraint. You could have seriously injured or killed these men, but instead, you used minimal force and gave them multiple opportunities to walk away peacefully. She turned back to Derek. Mr. Sullivan, you built your reputation on targeting people you perceived as weak. The elderly, small business owners, teenagers. But when you encountered a genuine warrior, a man who had faced real danger in service to his country, your entire facade crumbled in minutes. Derek stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The victim impact statements in this case are particularly compelling, Judge Hendricks continued, pulling out a thick binder. George Patterson, owner of Rosie's Roadside Diner, testified that he paid you $18,000 over 3 years because you threatened to hurt his family. Maria Santos described watching you terrorize customers while she felt powerless to intervene. Harold and Dorothy Mitchell spoke about their grandson's drug addiction, which began when your associates sold him methamphetamine at age 16. She read through more statements, each one detailing the pervasive fear and economic damage the Iron Skulls had inflicted on Pinewood. But this case is about more than one gang's criminal activities, Judge Hendricks said. It's about what happens when a community is held hostage by fear, and what happens when one person with courage breaks that cycle. Assistant Special Agent in Charge Rebecca Martinez from the FBI's Billings office stood to present additional findings. Your Honor, our investigation uncovered connections between the Iron Skulls and larger criminal networks operating across Montana and Wyoming. Derek Sullivan's organization was a small operation, but they were part of a distribution chain for methamphetamine coming from Mexico through interstate trafficking rings. She displayed charts showing the connections. By dismantling the Iron Skulls, we've been able to identify and arrest members of 3 larger criminal organizations. 27 additional arrests have been made across 2 states, and we've seized over $2 million in assets and 50 kilograms of illegal narcotics. Sam listened quietly, amazed at how one confrontation in a diner parking lot had cascaded into such far-reaching consequences. Mr. Sullivan, Judge Hendricks addressed Derek directly, you stood in that parking lot and threatened a man who had dedicated his life to protecting others. You called him weak because of his age. You assumed his appearance told you everything you needed to know about his capabilities. That assumption was your downfall. She consulted the sentencing guidelines. The federal sentencing recommendations for your crimes, given the aggravating factors of violence, drug distribution, and racketeering, would typically result in a sentence of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Derek's mother sobbed in the gallery. His father sat stone-faced, having disowned his son weeks earlier. However, the judge continued, I've received a letter from Command Sergeant Major Crawford requesting leniency on your behalf. Would you like to explain your reasoning, Sergeant Major? Sam stood again, clearing his throat. Your Honor, Derek Sullivan and his associates are young men who made terrible choices. But I've seen genuine evil in my career, terrorists who kill indiscriminately, warlords who enslave children, men who enjoy inflicting suffering. These young men aren't that. They're misguided, foolish, and they caused real harm, but I believe they can be rehabilitated. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I spent 35 years fighting enemies of our country. I don't want to see young Americans throw their lives away when they could potentially become productive citizens. They deserve punishment for what they've done, but they also deserve a chance at redemption. Judge Hendricks considered this thoughtfully. Your compassion is noted, Sergeant Major, and it speaks to your character. However, this court must balance mercy with justice and public safety. She addressed Derek once more. Derek Sullivan, you are hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will also be required to pay restitution totaling $250,000 to the businesses and individuals you victimized. Derek's shoulders sagged with relief. 8 years was far less than the 20 he'd been facing. Kyle Peterson, 6 years. Travis Morgan, 7 years. Justin Clark, 5 years. Blake Henderson, 3 years as a youthful offender. Ryan Foster, 2 years for his lesser role in the conspiracy. One by one, the Iron Skulls learned their fates. The gang that had terrorized Pinewood for 3 years was officially dismantled. Furthermore, Judge Hendricks added, this court is ordering the creation of a community restoration fund. All assets seized from the Iron Skulls, vehicles, cash, property, will be liquidated and distributed to the businesses and individuals they victimized. An additional $500,000 from federal asset forfeiture funds will be allocated to drug treatment programs and community policing initiatives in Pinewood. She lifted her gavel. Let this case serve as a reminder that criminal enterprises built on fear and intimidation are inherently fragile. They collapse the moment someone refuses to be afraid. And let it also serve as a reminder that heroes come in many forms. Sometimes they're 72-year-old veterans who just want to enjoy their coffee in peace. The gavel fell, and the sentencing was complete. As the courtroom emptied, several people approached Sam to shake his hand or thank him. Among them was Derek's mother, a tired-looking woman in her 50s. "Mr. Crawford," she said, tears streaming down her face, "thank you for asking for leniency for my son. He doesn't deserve your kindness after what he tried to do to you." Sam took her hand gently. "Ma'am, your son made bad choices, but 8 years gives him a chance to make better ones. He'll be 46 when he gets out. That's young enough to build a real life if he chooses to." Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Coleman was giving a statement to reporters. "This case demonstrates that justice prevails when communities stand together against criminal intimidation. We're grateful to Command Sergeant Major Crawford for his courage and to every citizen of Pinewood who came forward to testify." A reporter called out, "Sheriff, is it true that Mr. Crawford defeated 6 armed gang members using only hand-to-hand combat?" "Mr. Crawford used minimal necessary force to defend himself," Coleman replied diplomatically. "What's more important is that his actions inspired an entire community to reclaim their town from fear." Sam slipped away before reporters could surround him, preferring to let the focus remain on Pinewood's recovery rather than his own actions. As he drove back to Pinewood in his old pickup truck, he reflected on the strange path his life had taken. He'd joined the Army at 18, seeking adventure and purpose. He'd spent 35 years in the shadows, conducting operations that would never be acknowledged, protecting people who would never know his name. He'd retired hoping for peace and anonymity, but apparently, his mission wasn't quite finished. The tattoo on his shoulder read "De oppresso liber," to free the oppressed. In Afghanistan, that had meant rescuing hostages from Taliban compounds. In Pinewood, Montana, it had meant standing up to a small-town gang in a diner parking lot. The scope was different, but the principle remained the same. And as Sam drove through the Montana mountains toward home, he realized that maybe, just maybe, that was exactly where he was meant to be. 1 year after the sentencing, Pinewood, Montana had transformed into a community that barely resembled the fear-gripped town it had been. The changes were both visible and profound, touching every aspect of life in the small mountain town. Rosie's roadside diner had become something of a pilgrimage site. Tourists passing through would stop specifically to eat at the place where that Delta Force guy took down the gang. George Patterson had framed the newspaper articles about the incident and hung them on the wall, not as a monument to violence, but as a reminder that courage could come from unexpected places. The corner booth where Sam sat every Tuesday evening now had a small brass plaque, reserved for local heroes. Sam had protested the designation, but Maria Santos had installed it anyway, and he'd learned to accept it with good grace. The $500,000 in federal funding had been transformative. Pinewood had opened a community center offering drug treatment programs, job training, and counseling services. 3 teenagers who had been addicted to methamphetamines sold by the Iron Skulls were now clean and working toward their high school diplomas. Sheriff Coleman's department had received funding for 2 additional deputies and modern equipment. More importantly, the relationship between law enforcement and the community had been rebuilt. Citizens no longer feared reporting crimes, knowing their sheriff would act on their complaints rather than being paralyzed by political pressure. The 15 businesses that had paid protection money to the Iron Skulls received full restitution. Several used the funds to expand their operations, hiring additional employees and contributing to a local economic revival. The hardware store opened a second location. The pharmacy added a medical clinic. George Patterson renovated Rosie's Diner, adding a community meeting room that hosted everything from AA meetings to town council sessions. Sam's role in all of this remained characteristically low profile. He still came to the diner every Tuesday at 6 p.m., still ordered black coffee and apple pie, and still deflected any attempts to make him the center of attention. But his presence had changed the town in ways beyond the dismantling of the Iron Skulls. Inspired by his example, other veterans in the area had come forward to form a community support network. They established a mentorship program connecting at-risk youth with veterans who could provide guidance and structure. Frank Delgado, the truck driver who had witnessed the confrontation, had started a scholarship fund for Pinewood students pursuing military service or law enforcement careers. The Samuel Crawford Scholarship awarded $5,000 annually to students who demonstrated both academic achievement and commitment to community service. Harold and Dorothy Mitchell's grandson, the one who had struggled with addiction, had been clean for 10 months and was now volunteering at the community center, sharing his story with other young people to warn them about the dangers of drug use. The national media attention had faded, but the story of Pinewood's recovery had become a case study taught in criminal justice programs across the country. The Pinewood model was now referenced in discussions about community policing, veteran reintegration, and grassroots resistance to organized crime. Derek Sullivan, 18 months into his 8-year sentence, had become a model prisoner. He'd earned his GED, completed a welding certification program, and written letters of apology to every person he'd victimized. Whether his transformation was genuine or strategic was still unclear, but Sam had visited him twice, offering the kind of mentorship Derek had never received from his politically connected uncle. "Why are you helping me?" Derek had asked during the second visit. "I tried to hurt you. I terrorized your town." Sam had considered the question carefully before answering. "Because I've seen what happens when young men with potential are written off as irredeemable. Some of the best soldiers I ever served with were kids who had made serious mistakes before they found purpose and discipline. You have 8 years to decide what kind of man you want to be when you get out." The other Iron Skulls members were on similar paths. Kyle Peterson was studying computer programming. Travis Morgan had gotten clean and was working with addiction counselors. Even the younger members were using their time productively, preparing for lives that didn't revolve around intimidation and crime. On the first anniversary of the incident, the town of Pinewood held a community celebration. It wasn't specifically about Sam or the Iron Skulls case, but rather a general appreciation for how far the town had come. Sam attended reluctantly, standing in the back of the crowd as Mayor Elizabeth Warren spoke about community resilience and the importance of standing up for what's right. "A year ago, we were a town held hostage by fear," Mayor Warren said. "One person's courage reminded us that we didn't have to accept that fear as permanent. That courage inspired others, and that inspiration became action, and that action became transformation." She didn't mention Sam by name. He'd specifically requested she not make the event about him, but everyone in the crowd knew exactly who she was talking about. After the speeches, a group of teenagers approached Sam. They were students from Pinewood High School, several of whom had been targeted by the Iron Skulls drug dealing. "Mr. Crawford," one of them said, "a young woman named Ashley Chen, we wanted to thank you. My older brother was beaten by those guys 2 years ago. He was too scared to even leave the house for months afterward. But after what you did, after showing that bullies could be stood up to, he got his confidence back. He's in college now, studying criminal justice. He wants to be an FBI agent." Sam smiled, genuinely touched. "Your brother's courage is his own. I just provided a reminder that fear doesn't have to be permanent." Another student, Marcus Williams, stepped forward. "We started a program at school called Stand Up Pinewood. We're teaching younger kids about the difference between violence and self-defense, about how to resist peer pressure, about standing up for what's right even when it's scary. Would you be willing to speak to some of our groups?" Sam hesitated. Public speaking wasn't his strength, and he preferred to remain in the background. But looking at these young people, seeing the hope and determination in their eyes, he realized that his story, or rather, the lesson of his story, could have value beyond what had happened in a parking lot a year ago. "I'll do it," he agreed. "But on one condition: we talk about principles, not about me. We talk about courage, service, and standing up for others. Not about fighting or violence." "Deal," Ashley said, grinning. As the celebration continued, Sam found himself surrounded by people whose lives had been changed by the events of that night. Business owners who no longer paid protection money. Parents whose children were free from drug dealers. Citizens who had reclaimed their sense of safety and community. Sheriff Coleman approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Quite a year, hasn't it been?" "Quite a year," Sam agreed, accepting the coffee. "You know what's funny?" Coleman mused. "You came to Pinewood to get away from being a warrior. To retire from fighting. And instead, you ended up leading one more mission, freeing a community from oppression." Sam looked around at the celebrating crowd, at the children playing without fear, at the business owners chatting without looking over their shoulders, at the future that Pinewood was building. "De oppresso libere," he said quietly. "To free the oppressed. I guess some missions never really end. They just change location." "The army taught you how to fight," Coleman observed. "But something else taught you when to fight and when to show mercy. That's what made the difference here." As the sun set behind the Montana mountains, casting long shadows across the town square, Sam reflected on the unexpected turn his retirement had taken. He thought his fighting days were behind him. He thought the skills he'd spent 35 years developing would gather dust in peaceful obscurity. But life had reminded him that evil operated at every level, from international terrorism to small-town intimidation. And justice required eternal vigilance, not just from active-duty soldiers and law enforcement, but from every person who chose to stand up rather than stand aside. The tattoo on his shoulder, usually hidden beneath his shirt, had become a symbol for Pinewood, not of violence, but of the principle that good people had a responsibility to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As he drove home that evening, his old pickup truck climbing the winding mountain road to his cabin, Sam felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the peace of retirement or escape, but the peace that came from knowing he'd made a difference. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos: "Your pie is in the fridge for Tuesday. See you then, hero." Sam smiled and typed back, "Just Sam. And thank you for the pie." Because that's what he was, what he'd always been, what he would always be, just Sam Crawford, a man who had learned long ago that the measure of a person wasn't their age, their appearance, or their past, but their willingness to stand up when it mattered most. And in a small diner in Pinewood, Montana, every Tuesday evening, that man would continue to sit in his corner booth, drinking black coffee and eating apple pie, a living reminder that heroes don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they just quietly do what needs to be done. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.